Liara, the alien princess, lived in a world unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Her kingdom stretched across sparkling valleys, towering crystal spires, and rivers that shimmered with colors that seemed alive. From the moment she could walk, she had been surrounded by stories, songs, and lessons about her people's strength and intelligence. Every teacher, advisor, and royal guard told her how her kingdom was unmatched in skill and wisdom. But among all these stories, one set of tales captured her attention the most: stories about humans. According to the legends, humans were warriors unlike any other. They were said to be fearless, clever, and resilient, able to survive in places that even the most advanced aliens could not. Some tales claimed they had defeated enormous beasts, conquered dangerous landscapes, and even challenged alien forces. Yet no one in Liara's world had ever seen a real human. For centuries, they had existed only in the imagination of storytellers. To Liara, these stories seemed more like fairy tales than truth. They were exciting, yes, but impossible. As she grew, Liara became more curious. She attended lessons in diplomacy, learning how to communicate with other worlds and settled disputes without fighting. She studied strategy and combat, practicing with instructors who taught her how to defend herself and lead others. She learned about her ancestors, their victories, their mistakes, and their clever ways of protecting the kingdom. Everything about her life was planned, disciplined, and full of expectation. Yet the stories of humans kept coming back to her mind. One afternoon, Liara sat in the highest tower of the palace, gazing at the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, with twin suns slowly sinking behind the mountains. Her heart felt restless. Do humans really exist? She wondered aloud. Her voice echoed softly against the walls. She thought of the tales she had heard since she was a child, the brave humans who never gave up, the warriors who could face any danger, the ones who could outthink the smartest aliens. But all of these stories seemed too strange to be real. They were exciting, yes, but impossible. Her advisors noticed her growing curiosity. "Princess," said Master Olin, the oldest of her teachers, "you must remember, humans are myths. They are stories that travel from one generation to the next. They are not real." Liara shook her head. "But what if they are real? What if we've just never met one? I want to see it for myself." Her words surprised the advisors. Most had spent decades trying to keep the princess focused on her duties. They believed the human tales were distractions, unnecessary worries for a young mind. Yet Liara could not let the question go. Her curiosity burned stronger every day. She began to imagine what a human would look like, how they would move, how they would speak. She thought about their strength, their courage, and the mystery that surrounded them. Every night, she dreamed of venturing beyond the palace walls to discover the truth. Liara's life inside the palace was full of routine. She woke with the sun, trained with instructors, learned new languages, and practiced strategy. But outside the palace, the world was vast and full of possibilities. She had heard of the borderlands where travelers from distant worlds sometimes passed. These lands were dangerous, but they held secrets that the palace could never show her. The idea of exploring them excited Liara. She wanted to see the unknown, to test her own courage, and perhaps to find proof that humans existed. Despite the warnings, Liara started preparing for her journey. She quietly observed the palace guards, learning their routines, memorizing the paths through the gardens and the forests beyond the walls. She practiced moving silently, training her senses to detect danger. She studied maps of the surrounding lands, noting rivers, cliffs, and hidden valleys. Every detail mattered. She knew that if humans were real, they would not be easy to find, and they might be cautious, clever, and aware of intruders. In the evenings, she would sit alone in her room, reviewing everything she had learned. She imagined herself standing face to face with a human warrior. How would she act? What would she say? Would they even speak her language? Liara realized that she could not rely on stories or legends. She needed to see it for herself. She wanted to test her own skills, her own courage, against something unknown. The thought made her pulse quicken with excitement and a little fear. Fear, she decided, was not a weakness. It was a signal that she was about to grow stronger. Her curiosity grew into determination. She began to question her advisor's warnings not out of rebellion, but out of a need to understand the truth. She wanted to see the world beyond the palace walls, to meet beings she had only heard about in stories, and to challenge the assumptions she had grown up with. The more she imagined meeting a human, the more she realized that the stories she had been told might only be a part of the truth. There was something real, something powerful out there waiting to be discovered. As the days passed, Liara's plans took shape. She would travel quietly, without drawing attention, and explore the borderlands herself. She would rely on her training, her intelligence, and her instincts. She knew the journey would be risky, but the possibility of discovering a human warrior made it worthwhile. She could feel the weight of history pressing on her shoulders, the responsibility of her position, and yet a spark of excitement lit her mind. The unknown called to her in a way nothing else had. Finally, the day came when Liara knew she could no longer wait. She packed a small bag with essentials, carefully choosing tools, maps, and supplies. She dressed in practical clothing, designed to allow freedom of movement, and left her royal insignia behind. This journey was not about status or power, it was about truth, discovery, and courage. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of expectation and the thrill of adventure at the same time. With one last glance at the palace, she stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever awaited her in the lands beyond the stories she had always known. Liara had grown up thinking that humans were myths, distant legends that could never touch her world. But as she walked into the borderlands, every step filled her with the possibility that myths might be real, that stories could come alive, and that the truth about humans might soon reveal itself. Little did she know, the moment she had dreamed of was approaching faster than she could imagine, and her life and her understanding of courage and strength was about to change forever. Liara stepped carefully through the borderlands, her senses alert to every sound, smell, and movement. The land was unlike the well-kept gardens of her palace. Jagged rocks rose from the ground like ancient sculptures, and wild plants twisted in strange shapes, some glowing faintly under the twin suns. Birds with bright, shimmering feathers darted between cliffs, calling to each other in melodies Liara had never heard. The air carried scents she did not recognize: earth, wild herbs, and something metallic, like iron. Every step she took reminded her that she was far from the safety of home, but excitement pushed away any lingering fear. She moved quietly, careful not to leave a trail. Liara remembered her training, how her ancestors had learned to move like shadows, invisible and observant. She stopped often to listen, to watch the environment, and to study the patterns of animals and wind. Every small detail mattered. She knew that if humans were real, they would be intelligent, patient, and aware. They would not reveal themselves easily. Liara's heart raced at the thought. She had spent her life imagining them, and now the possibility of finally seeing one filled her with a strange mix of wonder and nervous anticipation. Hours passed as she navigated narrow passes, crossed shallow rivers, and climbed rocky slopes. Occasionally, she would pause to rest, sitting on a ledge and looking out over the vast lands below. From high above, the valleys seemed endless, stretching into the horizon. Liara thought of the stories she had been told. Humans had been described as creatures who could survive anywhere, even in harsh, unwelcoming environments. Yet the reality before her was more challenging than any tale. The sun was hot during the day, and the wind grew sharp in the evening. Still, she pressed on, driven by curiosity and the desire to see the truth for herself. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Liara reached a secluded valley. The valley was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The plants were taller and denser here, and strange stone formations cast long shadows across the ground. Something in the air felt different, charged with energy, as if the valley itself was aware of her presence. She slowed her pace, moving carefully among the rocks and bushes. Every sense was heightened. She had traveled far and risked much, and now she felt that she was close to discovering something extraordinary. Then she saw him. At first it was just a movement, a shadow slipping between the trees. Liara froze, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the fading light, stood a human warrior. He was not enormous or monstrous, as some stories had suggested, but there was a quiet power in his presence. His body was strong and fit, yet there was no unnecessary display of force. His eyes were sharp, observing his surroundings with focus and intelligence. Every movement he made was precise, careful, and purposeful. Liara's heart raced. The human was real. All the stories, all the myths she had grown up hearing had not prepared her for the reality of standing before one. She watched him from a distance, hidden behind a large rock. The human warrior was examining the valley, moving silently as if he belonged to the land itself. Liara noticed the way he crouched to inspect footprints in the soil, the way he touched the leaves to check for traps or hazards. He was cautious, aware, and fully in control. For the first time, Liara realized that humans were not just strong. They were clever, disciplined, and skilled in ways her people had only imagined. Her respect for them grew with every gesture he made. Curiosity overcame her caution. Liara stepped forward, revealing herself to the human. The warrior did not startle or retreat. Instead, he stopped and turned his gaze toward her. His eyes were steady, filled with calm observation and a flicker of curiosity. There was no fear, no aggression, only measured awareness. Liara felt a strange sensation, a mixture of relief, awe, and excitement. She had come face to face with a human, and he was as impressive as the stories claimed, though in ways she had never imagined. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. The human studied her for a moment before responding. "I am called Arik," he said. His voice was calm, confident, and carried a tone of quiet authority. "And who are you?" "I am Liara, princess of my kingdom," she replied. She watched him carefully, trying to understand the strength he seemed to possess. Not just physical strength, but a deeper, sharper power in his mind and spirit. She noticed his movements, the way he balanced, how he seemed ready to act at a moment's notice, yet chose not to. Arik smiled faintly, as if acknowledging her presence without threat. "You are far from home," he observed. "What brings you here?" Liara hesitated. She could not tell him the full truth, not yet. Instead, she said, "I wanted to see for myself if the stories were true." She felt a thrill as she said it. Finally, the secret she had carried in her heart for so long was out in the open. Arik's eyes glimmered with understanding. "Stories can often be more truth than lies," he said. "But seeing is believing." He gestured to the valley around them. "This land is not easy. It tests everyone who enters. Few survive without knowledge, patience, and strength." Liara felt both challenged and excited. This was more than she had expected. The human was not only real, but wise, skilled, and aware in ways that surpassed her imagination. She realized that the stories she had heard were only fragments of the truth. Humans were not just warriors, they were thinkers, observers, and strategists. Her assumptions about them, based on palace legends, were incomplete. For the next hours, Liara and Arik observed the valley together. He demonstrated simple techniques of tracking and survival, moving with a skill that seemed almost natural. Liara watched and learned, noting every detail. She realized that humans survived not through brute force alone, but through patience, intelligence, and adaptability. The warrior's calm and deliberate actions impressed her more than any tale of battle could. As the sky turned dark and the twin moons rose, casting silver light across the valley, Liara felt a mixture of awe and anticipation. She had crossed into unknown lands, faced the risk of danger, and discovered a human for herself. The stories were true, yet even more incredible than she had imagined. The warrior's presence challenged her pride, tested her courage, and inspired her curiosity. She knew that meeting him was only the beginning. There was much to learn, much to understand, and much to experience in the days to come. Liara realized that this encounter would change her understanding of the world. The human was not a legend or a myth. He was real, alive, and full of lessons to teach. And for the first time, she felt that the stories of her childhood were only the beginning of something much greater, a journey that would reveal truths about strength, courage, and the unexpected power of beings she had once thought impossible. Liara's curiosity grew stronger with every passing moment. She had seen the human warrior, Arik, in action, and it had left her both amazed and unsettled. He was real, clever, and strong, and yet there was something more about him that she could not put into words. It was not just his muscles or his agility. It was the calm in his eyes, the careful way he assessed his surroundings, and the sense that he understood the world in ways she had never imagined. Liara knew she had to learn more. She had to test him, not to harm him, but to see what he was truly capable of. She stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his movements. "I want to see if the tales of human warriors are true," she said firmly. "Show me your strength." Arik raised an eyebrow, but did not react with anger or arrogance. "Strength is not always shown in battle," he said calmly. "It is shown in patience, in thinking, in knowing when to act and when to wait." Liara smiled faintly. She had heard similar words in her training at the palace, but there was something different in the way he spoke. It was not lessons learned from books or tutors. It was experience, lived and tested in ways she had never faced. She decided to begin with a small challenge, one that would show her how he moved and reacted under pressure. First, she tested his agility. Using her knowledge of alien martial arts, she created small obstacles among the rocks and plants, trying to see if he could adapt. Arik moved with precision, leaping over stones, ducking under branches, and landing silently on uneven ground. Liara watched in awe. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate, and yet it seemed effortless. He did not rush or panic. His actions were smooth, controlled, and almost poetic. It was nothing like the exaggerated movements described in the tales. This was real, intelligent skill. Next, she tested his endurance. She asked him to follow her through a narrow, winding path that climbed steep rocks and crossed cold streams. Arik kept pace with her easily, never showing signs of fatigue. He breathed steadily, his focus unwavering. Liara realized that stories of humans tiring quickly were false. This warrior could go on for hours, perhaps days, without giving up. She felt a mixture of respect and disbelief. Humans were far more resilient than she had ever imagined. Then came her test of strength. Liara conjured a simple challenge using a fallen tree and a large rock. She wanted to see how Arik would lift, move, and manipulate objects, and how quickly he could adapt to obstacles. He approached calmly, studying the tree and rock carefully before taking action. With a few precise movements, he rolled the rock aside and used leverage to shift the tree, all without strain or unnecessary effort. Liara's jaw almost dropped. It was not brute force that made him powerful. It was intelligence, understanding, and the ability to make complex calculations in seconds. The human warrior was more impressive than any myth could have described. Liara decided it was time to test his combat skills, not aggressively, but in a controlled way that would show his instincts. She adopted a defensive stance, moving toward him slowly, observing his reactions. Arik mirrored her movements, keeping a careful distance. He did not attack recklessly, yet his posture and eyes told her that he could respond instantly if needed. Every time she moved, he adjusted with precision, predicting her actions without overextending himself. It was a dance of awareness and skill. Liara realized that humans, in truth, were not just fighters. They were thinkers, strategists, and observers. Every move he made was based on thought, not impulse. Hours passed as they tested each other, but neither aimed to hurt the other. Liara noticed something surprising. She was learning from him. The warrior's calm approach, patience, and awareness were qualities she had never mastered fully, despite years of training. She began to reflect on her own skills, seeing where pride or haste might have clouded her judgment. Arik was teaching her not through words alone, but through example. Every action, every choice, every movement was a lesson. As the sun began to set and the valley glowed in orange and violet light, Liara felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had challenged the human, and he had met every test with skill and intelligence. She could not deny it. He was extraordinary. But it was more than that. Arik's strength was not just physical. It was in his mind, his focus, his ability to remain calm under pressure, and in the way he adapted to every situation. He was, in every way that mattered, a true warrior. Liara stepped back and lowered her stance, her chest rising and falling with effort. "You are incredible," she admitted, her voice filled with genuine respect. "The stories do not capture what you truly are." Arik smiled faintly. "Stories rarely do," he said. "They capture parts of truth, but never the whole. Real strength is more than fighting ability. It is knowing yourself, understanding others, and acting wisely." Liara thought about his words. For the first time, she realized that much of what she had believed about power, strength, and warriors was incomplete. In her kingdom, power was often measured in status, skill with weapons, or command over others. But Arik showed her that true power was more subtle, more enduring. It was in patience, intelligence, and courage. The night grew darker, and the stars appeared one by one, sparkling across the sky. Liara and Arik sat together on a large, flat rock, resting after the tests. They shared stories of their worlds, not as teacher and student, but as two beings learning from each other. Liara spoke of her palace, her lessons, and the myths she had grown up with. Arik shared tales of his travels, the challenges he had faced, and the lessons learned through experience. Each story deepened Liara's understanding of what it meant to be strong, brave, and wise. By the time the moons shone brightly overhead, Liara felt a transformation within herself. She was no longer just a princess of a distant kingdom. She was a learner, an observer, and someone who had glimpsed the truth about a species she had once dismissed as legend. The human warrior had shown her a new way to see the world, not through pride, fear, or assumptions, but through careful observation, respect, and courage. As they prepared to rest for the night, Liara reflected on the day's events. She had set out to test a human warrior, but in doing so, she had tested herself as well. She had learned humility, patience, and the value of wisdom over brute strength. and she knew that tomorrow and the days after would bring even more lessons. The human warrior was not only impressive, he was a teacher, a guide, and a reminder that the world was larger and more complex than any story or myth could ever capture. Liara fell asleep under the glowing moons, her mind filled with wonder and anticipation. She knew that this encounter was only the beginning, that the lessons of the human warrior would continue to unfold, and that her understanding of strength, courage, and respect would never be the same again. The next morning, Liara awoke to the soft light of the twin suns streaming over the valley. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wild herbs and fresh earth. She stretched, feeling the cool wind on her skin, and looked toward Auric. He was already awake, sitting quietly on a rock, observing the valley with the same calm focus she had noticed the day before. There was no hurry in his movements, no unnecessary noise, just awareness and patience. Liara felt a sense of respect and admiration growing even stronger within her. She joined him silently, taking a seat nearby. Today would be different. Yesterday had been about testing strength and skill, but now she wanted to understand the human warrior more deeply, not just what he could do, but why he did it. She realized that strength alone did not make a warrior remarkable. It was the choices, the principles, and the mindset behind every action that truly mattered. Auric turned to her with a gentle smile. "Are you ready to learn more?" he asked. Liara nodded eagerly. "Yes, I want to understand what it really means to be a warrior, not just physically but in every way." They began the day by walking through the valley, moving slowly and observing their surroundings. Auric pointed out details that Liara had never noticed before. How the wind shifted the leaves, how small creatures left trails that revealed hidden paths, and how the terrain itself could guide decisions in moments of danger. He explained that humans relied on awareness and observation to survive, not just strength or speed. Every detail mattered. Liara listened carefully, absorbing every word. She began to see the world through his eyes, noticing patterns, connections, and possibilities that had once escaped her. For the first time, she understood that being a warrior was not about rushing into battle or showing dominance. It was about thinking ahead, observing carefully, and acting wisely. Strength without thought was dangerous. Strength with understanding was powerful. As the day went on, Auric shared stories of his past experiences. He spoke of challenges in distant lands, where he had faced harsh environments, unpredictable adversaries, and situations where failure could mean disaster. Yet he did not speak with pride or boastfulness. Instead, he spoke with honesty, reflecting on his mistakes, the lessons he had learned, and the moments where patience and intelligence had saved him. Liara listened intently, realizing that true courage was not always about heroism or daring feats. It was often about persistence, careful planning, and learning from every experience. Liara wanted to understand more about his mindset. "How do you stay calm in dangerous situations?" she asked. "I imagine fear could be overwhelming." Auric looked at her thoughtfully. "Fear is natural," he said, "but a warrior learns to respect it, not ignore it. Fear shows where danger might be, but it does not control decisions. A human survives by observing, thinking, and acting deliberately. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is acting wisely despite it." Liara considered this deeply. In her palace, courage was often measured by how boldly one acted, sometimes without thinking. But Auric's approach was different. It was deliberate, thoughtful, and grounded in understanding. She realized that bravery was more than just action. It was a careful balance between awareness, patience, and resolve. They spent the afternoon practicing techniques that went beyond physical combat. Auric taught Liara how to anticipate movement, how to read subtle signals in an opponent's posture, and how to use the environment to one's advantage. Each exercise challenged her mind as much as her body. Liara realized that strategy, observation, and adaptation were as important as strength and agility. By the end of the day, she felt a shift within herself. Her confidence was no longer just about her royal training. It was growing from understanding, insight, and respect for true skill. As evening approached, they rested beside a small stream. Liara watched the water flowing over smooth stones and thought about how life, much like the stream, moved with constant change. Arik spoke quietly, almost as if reflecting to himself. Every action has a consequence. Every choice matters. A warrior's strength is not only in combat, but in wisdom, patience, and understanding of the world. Liara nodded slowly. She had always believed that strength came from power, weapons, and authority. But Arik was showing her something different. A strength that was lasting, adaptable, and thoughtful. It was a strength that inspired respect, not fear. It was a strength that built trust, not walls. The princess felt a deep sense of admiration and a desire to embrace these lessons in her own life. They spent the night under the glowing moons, sharing stories, thoughts, and reflections. Liara realized that the human warrior's teachings were more than just skills. They were a philosophy, a way of seeing the world and living with purpose. She thought of her kingdom, her advisors, and the myths that had shaped her understanding. She saw now that myths could only capture fragments of truth, and that real knowledge came from experience, observation, and interaction. Liara understood something important. Humans were not just tales of courage and strength. They were thinkers, observers, and learners. They valued wisdom as much as skill, patience as much as action, and insight as much as force. Arik had shown her that true warriors were not defined solely by victories in battle, but by their ability to navigate life with awareness, integrity, and respect for others. By the end of the night, Liara felt transformed. The princess, who had doubted the existence of humans and dismissed their stories, was now deeply aware of their reality and their value. She no longer saw them as myths or exaggerations. She saw them as living beings with extraordinary strength, intelligence, and wisdom, qualities that challenged her assumptions and inspired her to grow. Liara knew that her encounter with Arik was changing her, not just as a princess, but as a person. She felt more thoughtful, more aware, and more willing to listen and learn. The lessons of the human warrior were becoming a part of her, guiding her thoughts, actions, and decisions. She realized that respect and understanding were as powerful as any weapon, and that true courage involved more than fearlessness. It involved awareness, patience, and careful choice. As the moons rose high above the valley, Liara closed her eyes, feeling the wind on her face and the quiet strength of the human warrior beside her. She had learned much in just one day, but she knew that this was only the beginning. There were more lessons to discover, more truths to understand, and more ways that humans could teach her about strength, courage, and wisdom. In that quiet night, under the shimmering moons and the watchful stars, Liara realized something profound. Humans were real, extraordinary, and complex, and her understanding of the world would never be the same again. She felt gratitude for the encounter, respect for the warrior, and a deep excitement for the journey that lay ahead. The princess had started as a skeptic, a girl who believed humans were only stories. Now she was a learner, an observer, and someone ready to embrace the wisdom and strength she had never known existed. The first light of dawn touched the valley, casting a soft golden glow over the rocks and plants. Liara stretched and rose, feeling stronger and more confident than she had ever felt before. The days she had spent with Arik had changed her in ways she could barely put into words. She had come seeking proof of human warriors, but she was leaving with something much more profound, a new understanding of courage, wisdom, and respect. Arik was already awake, sitting near the stream and watching the valley as if he could see every detail at once. Liara approached him, a smile on her face. "Thank you for everything," she said sincerely. "I came to see if the stories were true, but I have learned far more than I ever expected." Arik nodded, his calm gaze meeting hers. "The truth is always greater than the stories," he replied. "Strength is more than what people see in tales. True strength lies in the mind, in patience, in understanding, and in the choices we make." Liara felt the weight of his words. She thought about her palace, her advisors, and the way her world had always measured strength. She realized that much of what she had been taught was incomplete. Power without wisdom could lead to mistakes, and pride without understanding could blind even the strongest ruler. The human warrior had shown her a different path, one of awareness, respect, and courage that went beyond physical skill. As they prepared to leave the valley, Liara looked back one last time. The land had been harsh, beautiful, and full of lessons. She had seen its challenges, felt its dangers, and discovered its secrets. Most importantly, she had met a being who had taught her lessons that no palace, book, or story could ever have conveyed. Humans were not myths. They were real, remarkable, and capable of inspiring respect and admiration. Their journey back toward her kingdom was quiet at first, filled with reflection. Liara spoke occasionally about what she had learned, and Arik listened, offering advice and insight when needed. She began to understand the value of communication, of sharing knowledge, and of learning from those different from oneself. Her respect for humans deepened with every step, and she realized that her kingdom could benefit from understanding them rather than fearing or dismissing them as mere stories. As they approached the palace, Liara felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She wondered how her advisors would react to her tales, how they would receive the truth about humans, and whether her kingdom was ready to embrace this new perspective. Yet she also felt a quiet confidence. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, learned from experience, and grown stronger as a result. Whatever challenges awaited, she knew she was prepared in ways she had never been before. When they entered the palace gates, Liara's advisors gathered quickly, sensing that something important had occurred. Liara took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to recount her journey. She described the valley, the challenges, and finally, the human warrior, Arik. She spoke of his skill, his intelligence, his patience, and the lessons he had taught her. Some advisors were skeptical, others surprised, but all listened as she conveyed the truth she had discovered. "I have seen him with my own eyes," Liara said firmly. "Humans are real. They are not just myths, and they are stronger, wiser, and more resilient than we could have imagined. We have much to learn from them, and our assumptions must change." Her words sparked a mixture of awe and reflection among her advisors. Many had grown up believing the tales were only stories, but now they could see, through Liara's experience, that there was truth waiting beyond myths. Some began asking questions, eager to learn more, while others quietly reconsidered long-held beliefs. The princess had not only brought proof of humans, but also a lesson in humility, respect, and the importance of seeking knowledge for oneself. Liara spent the following days sharing her experience in detail, organizing lessons inspired by what she had learned from Arik. She emphasized the importance of observation, patience, and careful decision-making. She encouraged her people to respect the unknown, to approach challenges with wisdom rather than fear, and to recognize that true strength was not just in power or technology, but in understanding, adaptability, and courage. Slowly, her kingdom began to change. The myths of humans were no longer dismissed. They were studied, respected, and appreciated for the truths they contained. Arik stayed with Liara for some time, helping her and her advisors understand the deeper lessons of strategy, awareness, and resilience. Together, they trained select groups of warriors, teaching them not only combat skills, but also patience, observation, and thoughtful decision-making. The lessons of the human warrior began to influence the kingdom, shaping a generation of leaders who valued wisdom as much as strength. Liara herself continued to grow. She reflected often on the valley, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned from Arik. She realized that her journey had been more than an adventure. It had been a transformation. She had arrived as a princess who doubted, who questioned myths, and who relied on pride and training. She returned as a leader who understood the value of respect, observation, patience, and courage in all its forms. The encounter also left a lasting impression on her heart. Liara understood that humans were more than stories. They were teachers, allies, and examples of qualities that could inspire entire worlds. She carried that understanding into her daily life, making decisions that reflected the lessons she had learned. Careful thought, respect for others, and courage grounded in wisdom. Over time, Liara's kingdom became stronger and wiser. Relationships with neighboring worlds improved as the princess applied the principles she had learned from Arik. Conflicts were approached with understanding, challenges were met with preparation and observation, and her people grew to respect the value of knowledge, patience, and adaptability. Liara's journey had created ripples that transformed her kingdom, showing that courage and wisdom could lead to lasting strength and prosperity. Though Arik eventually continued his travels, Liara never forgot him. The lessons he had taught her remained with her always, shaping her leadership, her decisions, and her understanding of the world. She realized that the human warrior had been more than a curiosity. He had been a guide, a teacher, and a reminder that myths often hold pieces of truth waiting to be discovered. Liara had begun her journey as a skeptic, a princess who believed humans were only tales. She returned not only with proof of their existence, but with a deeper understanding of courage, strength, and wisdom. The encounter had changed her life, her perspective, and her kingdom. Humans were real, extraordinary, and deserving of respect. And Liara, now wiser and more thoughtful, was ready to lead her people into a future shaped by knowledge, courage, and understanding. As she stood on the balcony of her palace that evening, watching the twin suns set and the stars appear, Liara felt a sense of peace and purpose. She had faced the unknown, discovered the truth, and grown stronger. Her kingdom would flourish under her guidance, inspired by the lessons of a human warrior who had shown her the real meaning of strength. The myths were no longer distant stories. They were living lessons, and Liara had learned them well.